Okay. Good afternoon. All right. I'm a steel drum builder, also called the steel pan, and this instrument from Trinidad came into my life when I was a junior in college back in the 1980s up in Ithaca, New York. And my brother Sean, who you'll meet later in a few minutes, had fallen in love with the sound of the calypso music from the 1950s and the 1940s and started bringing home records of this sound of the original early steel drums that don't have a very similar sound to the instruments that we hear today. And I just fell in love with the sound of the instrument. And the backyard of our off-campus house became a steel drum shop immediately. We had never even seen a steel drum before when we started to have the desire to start building them. So we got oil barrels and we started doing the process, and this was before the internet, so we went to a library and we found a book that Pete Seeger had written back in the 1964, 63, and Pete Seeger, who was just such a great man who just recently passed away, he went down with his 7-year-old daughter to Trinidad, and he spent a week there filming Kim Loy Wong, who was one of the early builders of steel drums, and his daughter was the videographer, or his camera person, and the two of them created a video and a booklet called How to Build a Steel Drum. And we took this book, and it became the most important pages to me. Every sentence was trying to understand this, because I not only fell in love with the instrument, but was enthralled by the mystery of it, the voodoo of taking metal and getting pitch out of it. And I went through the steps that so many of us go through when we're trying to become skilled at something that comes from another culture. And what I want to just spend a couple minutes talking with you about is the development of an instrument as it reaches its final form. Every instrument that we know has gone through this process. And it always starts off the same way. Like in that video where we saw the one guy dancing, you have to have a unique set of people that start dreaming up crazy ideas. If you look at the first pianos that were built, there's all different types of them. And eventually, certain concepts start winning out. Well, we need this certain tonal range. We need them to be durable enough to play in this environment. And the process takes, for some instruments, hundreds of years to end up in their final form. And by final form, I mean that, is there any trumpet players in the audience? Okay, excellent. So if you picked up a trumpet here and played it, or went to California and picked up a trumpet, or Europe, or Asia, it would be similar enough for you to be able to play it. Well, the steel drum has not reached that point yet. There's a few hundred builders, and we all have disagreements about the note arrangement of the instruments and every variable that you could imagine involved with it, from the harmonics, the way that it's tuned. And for me, I'm an outsider from Trinidad. I was born in Jamaica, New York, but I came to this craft with a true passion for the instrument. And the process of becoming excellent at something from another culture is a delicate process if you want to participate in the final form of an instrument. So I went through many of the steps that people go through when they fall in love with an art form or a culture. First thing, this is my first trip to Trinidad, and that's looking down at Port of Spain. And I think that every journey like this for an individual starts off with hero worship. For me, it was Ellie Minette and Spree Simon. Spree Simon and Ellie Minette were two of the first people to start the process. A steel drum was born from bins, biscuit tins, and trash cans. And although it was in the late 30s and the early 40s, it was in Trinidad, so there is no film of it. There's no audio files of it. It's still steeped in oral tradition. And you'll hear dozens of different stories and arguments about who invented what, and some of those people are still alive. The instrument is still at the point where the original source is here, and those people are in their 80s now that were 12 or 13 when they started this process of building an instrument. But to understand the beginning point of an instrument, imagine a young boy in Trinidad playing a rhythm from his village. You see, carnival celebration in the Caribbean is taken very seriously. It's a week-long event. And in the 30s and in the 40s, the entire island would come together to Port of Spain, and in the middle of this city, you can see that grassy knoll in the middle? There's a rotunda. And everybody would come from around the country to get together to this rotunda to celebrate. And along the way, each village would walk together because there was very few cars. And when they would walk for a day to get there, they started developing rhythms that identified their village. And they would play them with pieces of bamboo that they cut along the way. And when you heard them coming, 100 people, the rhythm would keep their energy for the day, and it would keep them having the ability to just stay together as a unit. But it would also serve as you could recognize where people came from. So I want to take 1 minute here just to get you guys to be that village. And we're going to play a simple little rhythm to feel what it felt like to do that as a group. So I want you to just get 1 foot. Let me hear you thumping it on the floor a little bit. Okay, good. Now, let's do this in 1 minute. We'll learn the simplest little rhythm, and it'll be our rhythm. So here we go. Do this with me. We're just going to hit our foot down and count to 4. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. Okay, now I'm going to see your hands out like this and make a fist and pull it in like this. Now we have to feel an offbeat, but it's going to be easy if you just trust me. Here we go. Ready? We're going to do the same thing here and then just do what I do up here. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can feel the power of community when you're physically connected like that, playing the simplest of rhythms. Well, the second stage that people seem to go through, like myself, when you're in love with something from far away of culture, is you go on your pilgrimage. You know, for everybody, it's a different thing. It's part of our coming of age. For me, that meant as a young, I guess this was about 15 years ago, I got a gig playing on a ship all the way down to Trinidad. It was the only way I could get there. I had to be there, had to taste it and feel it. So I got a chance to play, and that was me on the ship on my way to Trinidad. And then you need the next thing. When you're in a vacuum and trying to understand an instrument, and it means so much to you, and you get to the source of it, what do you want to do? That's Batchik, who was my driver, who took me and my wife all around the island to get to see all these pan yards. In each village, there would be a pan yard, which is a steel pan, that would be sometimes abandoned buildings, old gas stations, but it was the center of the community. And people get together for months to learn one song, a whole village to perform at Panorama. So the village comes together to learn one complicated 10-minute song by playing it every night for hours. So I got a chance to go in there, and I needed to see other drums in there. What were they like in Trinidad, you know? And consumed with this, but always feeling like an outsider. Then you get to the third phase. And everybody I see now when they're coming through is you want a sensei, and then you want to kill your sensei, right? And it's the process, it's as old as time, you know, that things that go through like that. And so that leads me to the development of the steel drum. In the 1950s, the steel drum went from being in small biscuit tins and trash cans to moving to larger barrels. And they found that by creating larger dents, you can get lower pitches. My mallet here. So if you look right here on this drum, which has fewer notes than this drum, the largest dent is here and has a pitch like this. The littlest dent is up here. And on a steel drum, this is your note area playing, just like a piano. This has one chromatic octave. Back in the 50s, this was a superpower drum, right? Because it could play every note, not just the key of C. And then eventually, we had the cycle of fifth span introduced, which has twice as many notes. It has an octave on the inside and an octave on the outside. And Over the course of the 1950s in Trinidad, they started to develop a version of a steel drum to replicate all the different members of our Western orchestra. So there's cello pans that are deep, and the way the notes are arranged creates different tonal characteristics that are similar to an actual cello. So you end up with entire orchestras like we had in the last picture. So we've now entered into the phase where there's different types of steel drums that cover the different ranges, but we lay the notes out completely differently. So as I entered into my 30s and then my 40s, I still had a hard time wanting to put myself into the formula. I wanted to find out what was Trinidad, everything that was magic in the beginning. And the instrument, and every instrument, as it gets through this process to get to the final form, it starts off from the culture, the place that it is. And there's an importance to have the respect and understanding of where something came from. But then you need to also be able to be ready to move it ahead and become part of the line of people of an instrument. And that's where you have to say, what do I bring to the table? And for me, I'm a math guy. That's what my life at Cornell was. That was where I come from. So the building of a drum for me is very mathematical. And to me, I want to, as a scientist, I want to document exactly what are the slopes, how thick do we have the metal, we want to burn it, take the voodoo out of it, which loses some of the charm of an instrument. But it's part of the process of an instrument going from being the citizen of a country. And when I say that they love the steel pan and are proud of it in Trinidad, I mean on a 50-cent piece from Trinidad is a steel drum. On a $20 bill from Trinidad is a steel drum. We don't have that connection in our country to the arts in the same way. But so you can understand that to stand and become part of a movement, like the first follower we saw in the other thing, you have to eventually put yourself into the puzzle. And for the steel drum, to make it to its final form requires it to forever be a child of Trinidad, but it's also now a citizen of the world, which means that the music will slowly change from just expecting to hear calypso music when you see a steel pan to hearing classical music or any style, anything that you can think of. So as a builder, for me, that leads me to, how does a movement happen? You see, the steel drum has a lot of limitations that keep it from being able to be in as many places as a trumpet. It came from the streets. It came from not costing anything, from using barrels that were all discarded from the oil industry. And it's become an instrument that can cost $10,000. And it's gone into schools that have the large enough grants, and it's very delicate, so it also needs to be retuned. When the process of building this drum starts with hammering it out till it's in a bowl shape, popping the notes out from the back, burning it over fire, and then hours of tuning by using a hammer to change the tensions in each bubble. But this needs to be revisited and retuned often. So it's a major problem for spreading the instrument because it needs to be maintained. And these are the challenges that we have for the instrument to be able to come take its rightful place in the scope-wise for the world. It is the largest new instrument that's come along, the steel drum. There's about 10,000 drums a year made, maybe. No one has a real number, a real record. There's 100 or so of us builders. But if you look at the orchestra and you start with guitars that have about 3 million a year, you can see the tiny drop that the steel drum is against that. The least common instrument in the orchestra is the piccolo flute. But there's about 300,000 piccolo flutes sold every year. From there, you drop all the way down to the steel drum. And it's the largest of the small instruments that are coming up to take its place. So for me as a builder, as I go into the older years of, I'm 46 now, but I'm a 46-year-old who has a 46-year-old pitcher's elbow from the years of swinging the sledgehammer. And I've changed my mentality from being in as many countries, selling drums to as many different individual people, to wanting to amass instruments and start a movement. So that means for me, traveling and teaching classrooms of kids, where I go to over 100 schools a year to try to expose as many of the next generation to the physical ability of playing the instrument in order to find those that are going to raise the art form. like Segovia, who was a guitar player, who really changed the instrument by showing that complex classical pieces could be performed solo on the guitar. The steel drum is going through that same process. So we can see it growing. That's my backyard. You can imagine how patient my wife is. That's my shop, and those are my instruments, and all those drums fit in one van. And we need to have a phase in a movement where it's not just a great idea. I could sit in my shop, and I could design forever changes to the drum, but it's only in taking those ideas and bringing them out to the real world in a tangible way that we can get to the result of what's going to happen with an instrument. So I'd like to finish by inviting my brother Sean up here, and we're going to play a little song that we wrote. It's called The Chesapeake's Crown. And just so you can get a chance to hear these instruments, and my hope is 20, 30 years from now, we will have achieved an instrument that is universal and has reached its form where it will be the same. And in order to get there, I have a line in my shop written right above my tuning room that I got from talking to Ellie Minette. And it says, my name's Kevin, it says, make all the decisions in this shop based on what's best for the instrument and not what's best for Kevin, and you will make all the right decisions. And that was essentially the word that I got from Ellie Minette when he was talking about how the instrument's going to grow past him when he's gone. And it may mean that it changes completely, like that the concepts of things when they reach their final form can look completely different. This is drums that are built from oil barrels, and this is a relatively new developing line of the steel drum family called steel tongue drum, and this is built from a propane tank. It's also steel. It's also something that was mass-produced to make it cheap enough to use, because this is the bottom half of a propane tank just like you have in your backyard from your grill. And it weighs the same as this, but it has a completely different sound. I don't know if you'll be able to hear that out here. Let's try it. And you can hear the resonance lasts longer, and its weight solves some of the problems of not needing to be tuned as often. So inside of all the variables that we're working for, the final form may look something like any of these different things. Okay, let's play our song here. I'm going to take this headphone off just because